Welcome back, children, to the part 2 recapitulation video of the French Revolution. Well, students, in our previous video, we stopped with France becoming a republic and a newly elected assembly called convention. The head of this newly elected assembly was Maximilien Robespierre, and his rule was called the Reign of Terror. Why was his rule called the Reign of Terror? Let's have a look. Robespierre followed a policy of severe control and punishment. All those people who opposed him were considered as enemies and was guillotine. In order to bring about equality among the people in France, he introduced many laws. Number 1, a maximum ceiling on wages and prices. Number 2, meat and bread were rationed. Number 3, farmers were forced to sell their grains to the government on the price laid by the government. Number 4, white flour or using of expensive white flour was prohibited, and all citizens were forced to eat wheat bread. Next one, equality was practiced to form of speech and address. Number 6, instead of traditional monsieur and madame, all French men and women were called citizens and citoyennes. Number 7, churches were shut down and their buildings were converted into barricades and offices. The people was so fed up with his policies and they started revolting against this, and finally he was convicted by court on July 1794, and the next day he was guillotined. Now let's look at the role of women in the French Revolution. Children, I have divided this into two parts. Women in the old regime, that is from 15th century till 1789, and women in the new regime, that is after the Constitution of 1791. Women in the old regime had to work for their livelihood. They had to work both at home and outside, and the salary which they got was much less than the men. The women of the old regime did not get access to education. It was only the daughters of nobles or wealthier people who had access to education. Now let's look how was the women in the new regime. The National Assembly people or the members brought a lot of laws favoring the women of France. They made education compulsory for all the French girls. The fathers could not force their daughters into marriage against their will. Divorce was made legal and could be applied both by men and women. Women also could now be trained for job. They could become artists or even run their own small business. But whether it was the women in the old regime or in the new regime, one thing was common. The women of France was not given the right to vote or the right to participate in the political decision of France. This made the people, the French women, very unhappy, and they formed clubs and associations to voice their view. One such association was called the Society of Revolutionary and Republic Women. The period of 1794 to 1804. This period was known for the slave trade. Children, we know the colonies in Caribbean, San Domingo, etc. was important supplier of tobacco, indigo, sugar, coffee, etc. And we also know that the Europeans were not willing to go and work in this plantation. So this led to a shortage of labor. In order to meet this shortage, a trackless slave trade took place between Europe, Africa, and America. French merchants sailed from the port of Bordeaux on Nantes to the African coast. They came in contact with the tribal chief, who in turn gave them people to work as slaves in these plantations. During the 18th century, there was a large criticism of the slave trade in France. The National Assembly, after a lot of discussion, decided to abolish the slave trade. But unfortunately, when Napoleon Bonaparte became the ruler of France, he reintroduced slavery in France. Napoleon Bonaparte, 1804 to 1815. 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself as the Emperor of France. He introduced many laws, such as protection of private properties, uniform system of weight and measures, etc., which was called as the Napoleon Civil Code. Children, regarding this, we will learn in detail when you come to class 10. The people of France considered him as a liberator in the beginning who would bring freedom to the people of France. But this was very disappointing, and at the end, the people of France became very angry with Napoleon. Napoleon was finally defeated at Waterloo in 1815. Now let's look at some important political symbols that existed during the French Revolution. First one is a broken chain, which actually meant freedom. The second one is a bundle of rod, which stands for unity. Third one is spectrum, which stands for loyal power. Fourth one we see an eye with a triangle radiating light. This means the ray of knowledge will be driven away from the clouds of ignorance. Next one, we see a snake biting its tail to form a ring. This is a symbol of eternity. The red hat is worn by the slaves who has become free. Blue, white and red symbolizes the national colors of France. The winged woman is the personification of law. The law tablet means the law is same for all and all are equal before it. Important events in French Revolution. Children, this is very important concept and you should be aware of the dates and events that took place during the French Revolution. So let's begin. 1774, Louis XVI became the King of France. 1789, National Assembly was formed and the same year storming of Bastille took place. 1791, the Constitution of France was written. 1792, King Louis was beheaded and France became a republic. 1793 to 94, it was called the Reign of Terror. It was a rule under Maximilian Robespierre, and the same year, introduction of directory rule took place in France. 1794 to 1805, this year was famous for the slave trade. 1804, Napoleon became the Emperor of France. 1815, Napoleon was defeated in Waterloo, and this was the end of Napoleonic rule in France. Children, I hope you have got a clear idea about all the important concepts related to this chapter. I will be back again with another recapitulation video. Till then, be safe and take care of yourself. Thank you for listening.